Hey there, John with Crow's Nest Craft. If you're looking for a really easy, really fun intro craft to get into terrain building, look no further because we're going to be making these little trees. These are just little Brillo pad trees. I made them out of dollar store Brillo pads, a dollar store skewer, some oven baked clay, and some of that cheap apple barrel paint that you can get from any box store. So, this is something that anybody can do. As far as tools, the most advanced thing that I used was some wire cutters, and you can even buy those at the dollar store. So, no excuses, you can do this one. Let's get started. So, these are the three things I'm going to be making these trees out of: some dollar store Brillo pads, dollar store skewers, and some cheap oven baked clay. I'll use a few extra things later on, but they're all super cheap, and you might even already have them in your house, like some craft paint. So, starting off, we're going to cut these Brillo pads into three different sizes: small, medium, and large. We're going to make these trees by layering the three different size variants to make a cone to be the representation of an evergreen tree. Because, like pine trees and evergreen trees, they're kind of cone shaped. Now we're going to be making the central timber for the tree. So I'm going to be using these slightly thicker dollar store skewers. I'm going to be cutting them up with these dollar store pliers actually, so another cheap thing you can grab and will come in handy. I cut them into slightly varying sizes, so that way not all the trees are the exact same size, but roughly around the same size. Once we get to the part where we actually assemble the tree, we're going to be using these skewers as skewers by putting all of the layers of the Brillo pads together to make the tree. We'll skewer them all together. So I want them all to be pointy, so any of the parts where the point wasn't on, like the middle sections that I chopped up, I'm just going to use this small razor blade to carve a slight point. That way I can still skewer the Brillo pads later. So, for obvious reasons, I can't keep these Brillo pad squares. I cut them this way because it was easy to keep them uniform, but now I'm going to use a pair of scissors to cut them on an angle so that way it's a little tapered to look a little bit more like tree branches, and I'm going to cut them into circles. So I'll just go through all of these and I will make them still semi-uniform, but I'm going to change up a few of the sizes here and there so I have some in-between sizes. Now that we've cut everything up, we're going to be making the bases. I want the bases to look like roots. Since I use a lot of LCD screens for battle mats, I want it to look natural when I put these on top of those. So I'm going to blend in the clay once I get it nice and soft into the skewer so it looks like one piece. I'll then make little tendrils that come off to look like natural roots, and I'll repeat that over and over again. But since I'm doing so many, I'm going to try and make them look a little different, so I'll do different root patterns. I'm going to add a few mushrooms here and there, just to make them look a little less uniform. Alright, so after we bake these guys up and they are hardened and cooled, we are going to hit them with a black paint Mod Podge mix, again to just try and blend the wood and the clay together so that way it looks like a consistent texture. We're not doing all of the wood, we're just doing part way up the trunk because a lot of it is going to be covered by the Brillo pads anyway. So right now we're just hitting the base with it. Now we're going to be starting the painting process. So I'm going to hit this with a base coat of some cheap apple barrel brown craft paint. You can pick this up at about any box store. It's around 50 cents. So this covers rather well considering it is a 50-cent paint, but just so I have a nice strong base coat, I'm going to hit it with about 2 or 3 coats to make sure it'll stay on after I do the washes and highlighting later on. So I've seen a few other people make these, specifically Black Magic Craft was the first one that I saw, and I really liked the idea, but he used flocking, and I know not everybody has that laying around, so I'm just dry brushing the Brillo pad with this dollar store makeup brush and some really light green paint. I'm even lightening it a little bit more with some white mixed in and slowly getting darker and lighter as I think it needs to be to look like tree branches. So you could use a skewer that we've already been using to stab the holes in the Brillo pads to put them on the tree, but I want to make sure it's a relatively thick hole, so I'm going to be boring it out with my Dremel. That way it doesn't take all of the paint off of the skewer when I slide all of these little circles down onto it. I really don't want to have to go back through and paint the inside of the tree one at a time. Now, to give a little bit of age and natural look to the wood, I'm going to be using a homemade black wash. I made this by taking some of the black craft paint, watering it down a lot, like a 1:3 ratio, 1 being paint, 3 being water, and a little bit of dish soap to act as a flow aid to make a homemade wash. And I just cover it in that so that way it brings out all the shades and shadows. Now, to give a little bit of dimension to it, I'm going to be dry brushing with another one of these dollar store makeup brushes. I'm using the light brown paint again, and I'm just going to lightly dry brush the roots and all the other raised areas that would be a little bit lighter and wouldn't be completely covered in shadow, because right now with the black wash it made everything super dark and I want a bit of it to stand out. So I'm gonna start by doing this dry brushing and it'll get me to a good highlighting base. After I'm done dry brushing, I'm gonna go through the parts where the dry brush hit it a little heavier or where I think I need a bit more light. And I'm gonna go with this much smaller brush and a little bit lighter brown and kind of just trace and feather around the roots and the base of the tree going up, just to give a little bit more detail to the bark and the base of the tree. Now, those few mushrooms that I put on a couple of these trees, I need to paint because they're not going to be brown like everything else. I'm using this slight off white. I'm going to go through and add a little bit more color to them in a minute, but right now a slight off white is going to be a really good base for these mushroom caps on the base of the tree. Now, to make the mushrooms look a little bit more natural, I'm going to be using what's called a flesh wash. It's slightly brownish, slightly reddish, and you can buy this one's from Vallejo. It's only a couple of dollars, but it's probably the most expensive paint item that I've used here. And this will just give a nice natural look to it. Usually you would use this for flesh tones, but in this instance, I'm going to be using it for some fungus tones, and it works rather well. So I'm unfortunately out of tacky glue, but Mod Podge works really well. So I'm going to use this as a PVA glue, and I'm going to stick it on the little hole in the middle of the Brillo pad. I will then slide it onto the skewer and kind of just layer to a point where I think it looks good and do varying sizes, making a nice cone shaped. As you can see, when I cut it, I did a few slightly different shapes, so that way they look a little bit different between each other. Once you finish actually gluing everything together and assembling these trees, you should go back through and do a quick dry brushing, again just to get your color back to anything you might have rubbed off in the process of pushing everything on. And after this, I'm also going to hit it with some protective coating. It's just a craft clear coat that you can find at most box stores. It's not needed, but it will help these last. And voila, I absolutely love the way these came out. I think they look rather unique between each other. I have some that are very skinny, some that are very fat, and I think it worked out well. These actually look like a forest. Like I said, I've seen Black Magic Craft make these, and I figured I'd put my own spin on it. doing the roots, that way it looks a little bit more natural on my battle mats and it doesn't have a big bulky base, was one of my main objectives with this, so that way I can use them on these LCD screens without looking a little out of place. But all in all, I really like this build. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I really enjoyed making these guys. I think they came out great. If you want to see more of my stuff, you can check out my Instagram, my TikTok, all of that. I have a lot of videos and pictures on those. And I also have some videos on here. So if you want to see more videos exactly like this one, where I'm making stuff out of dollar store or cheap things that I find around the house and use it for Dungeons and Dragons and other TTRPGs, look no further. I got a bunch of that stuff. So check out my channel and my other social medias. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.